Yellowstone lay still, and as all the cowboys gathered around him, I heard old Lyle Sankey say, "There'll never be another Brown. I'd like to run the dive again." But out there on the prairie, there's a mare with Mustang blood. The colt runs close. Outlaw stuff.
God's proud for the brand. He ain't one to complain. Thankful for the rain. Forever a cowboy, he defines the word grit. His only bad habit, he don't know when to quit. Free is the spirit that runs through his veins. Forever a cowboy, he will remain. Now he's out mending fences in all kinds of ways. The sun rises and sets and strays. Knows how to sort things out in all kinds of weather, through the good and the bad, with a soul made of leather. Forever a cowboy, he defines the word grit. His only bad habit, he don't know it. Is the spirit that runs through his veins. Forever a cowboy, he will remain. Silver screen cowboys, man, they were tough. Salt of the earth, in the saddle he sings about stories and
Good, 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 good. It'll come on now. Thank you. And what is this? To be included. Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. I'm Wanda Burgett. I am the chair of the Wyoming Energy Authority, and I'm pleased to welcome you to day 2 of the Next Frontier Energy Summit. And I'm going to introduce you to our board of directors. We're an industrial board comprised of individuals who have special knowledge, education, and experience in the broad fields of energy and natural resource development, as required more specifically by our enabling statute. So board members, when I introduce you, please rise and be recognized. I'm also going to be recognizing the ex officio members of our board and their affiliations. And I would also ask the audience to please hold your applause until the end. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Wendy Hutchinson. Wendy is the immediate past chair and worked for a career in the big, beautiful coal industry with expertise in industrial siting development, environmental management, and external affairs. Mark Stakey, I don't believe he's with us yet this morning, but he is a past chair with a career in the electric and natural utility industry. Michelle Cook. Michelle is serving as the current vice chair and is employed by the oil and gas sector as a regulatory and government affairs professional. Kara Chiquette. Kara is serving as the current secretary and with experience in electrical power generation and transmission industry, including renewables. Ken Miller. Ken, his expertise includes mine engineering and operation management with a strong background in the business of electricity. We have another member that isn't here. Her name is Donna Lawrence. Her experience includes expertise in the property tax field, specializing in the oil and gas industry. So my credentials as a board member include a career in the big, beautiful coal industry with expertise in mineral leasing, environmental management, and regulatory policy. So our ex officio members of the board include Holly Krepka. She's with the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. Josh Durrell, the Wyoming Business Council. Lon Whitman, the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. Ton Kropich, the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission, and Randall Luthi with the Governor's Office. It's often correctly stated that energy is the heart of the economy, and Wyoming is the heart of energy. But I'm going to take this one step further, and I propose that Wyoming is the heart of energy innovation. The Wyoming Energy Authority supports the development and incorporation of innovative technologies and practices into the Wyoming energy sector. This is accomplished through public-private partnerships that span across academia, like the School of Energy Resources, other state and federal agencies, and of course our private sector partners, many of whom are in the room today. May you enjoy an insightful morning as we celebrate the development of energy innovations and the partnerships that bring them to fruition. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize Rob Krieger and the Wyoming Energy Authority staff, Emily Sorensen with Empowered Solutions, and Three Elephants Public Relations team for a very successful summit. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, please join me in a big round of applause for our sponsors. We certainly will not be able to do this without them. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wanda, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to day two. We'll invite the next panelists up. As you all know, uranium has a long history in the state of Wyoming, but we're kind of seeing a renaissance right now, which is super exciting. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Grayson Buckingham, the President and CEO of DISA Technologies, John Cash, President and CEO of UR Energy, Wayne Healy, former CEO of Peninsula Energy, and Scott Melby, the Executive Vice President of Uranium Energy Corporation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. And it's a pleasure to be here. As Rob mentioned, my name is Grayson Buckingham, President and CEO of DISA Technologies. And it's truly an honor to be on this stage. 8 years ago, I was competing with my co-founder at the Elbogen competition. So this brings back a lot of memories. And we were fortunate enough to be a winner in the Elbogen competition. And that really kickstarted our journey into forming DISA. And from there, we were able to bring in some additional non-dilutive funding, secure an angel investor with Jared Sack. I saw him earlier, Breakthrough 307. And, fast forward to today, we've raised over $40 million in private capital. We have over 35 employees headquartered here in Casper, Wyoming, and are continuing to grow our business. And we're really focused on two different spaces. One's in critical minerals, where we're trying to disrupt technology that's been around since the medieval ages. And through our startup journey, we finally have those large-scale systems that we're installing in mines throughout the globe today. And then on the other side, which I think is why Rob invited me to be on this panel, we have the only validated technology by US EPA and Department of Energy to remediate abandoned uranium mines. EPA estimates there's approximately 15,000 of sites associated with abandoned uranium mine waste throughout the western US. A lot of that's here in Wyoming as well. And so we're working on those efforts, in particular on the Navajo Nation, to help clean up those sites. So, with me, we've got an esteemed group of panelists. I'd like to, and then I'll hand it over to them, but Scott Melby, Executive Vice President for Uranium Energy Corp., also the President of the Uranium Producers of America. We have John Cash, CEO of UR Energy, and really driving forward a lot of different projects here in Wyoming. And then Wayne Healy, former CEO of Peninsula and longstanding executive in the uranium space here in Wyoming. So, Scott, we'll start with you, and we can go through everybody else and maybe give a little bit more about yourself and what projects you're working on in Wyoming and what excites you most on the advancements that are happening in Wyoming today.
Great. Thank you, Grayson, and appreciate the opportunity to be here in Wyoming for this great event, a great organization. I'm starting, I think, my 42nd year in uranium and nuclear energy, the last 10 years of which I've been with Uranium Energy Corp., which really in the last 4 or 5 years, we've invested over $1 billion in our uranium activities in North America, mainly Wyoming and Texas, and we've become one of the world's fastest growing uranium companies and the largest U.S. uranium company measured by market cap, by licensed capacity, 12 million pounds of licensed capacity, and resources in the ground. We've got 500 million pounds of uranium resources in North America. 300 million pounds of that is within 100 miles of 2 central processing plants and 1 conventional mill. In Wyoming, one of those major acquisitions we made was acquiring the Uranium One assets from the Russians. Yes, that Uranium One. We were very happy to kick the Russians out of Wyoming and get it back, those operations back in American hands, which we've restarted, and we're producing yellow cake again at Irigaray Christensen Ranch in Powder River Basin. We've also acquired the Sweetwater mill in the Great Divide Basin of Wyoming. And we'd like to have that coming on and producing in the next 3 years. We'll modify some of the conventional mill capacity to handle ISR uranium mined in the Great Divide Basin. And then we're also starting up our third hub and spoke in South Texas at Hobson and Burke Hollow, where we'll be producing down there by the third and fourth quarter of this year.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. John?
All right. Good morning, everyone. John Cash, CEO, Chairman of the Board for UR Energy. UR Energy, we're really focused on in situ mining of uranium exclusively in Wyoming. We have a number of projects throughout the state, but really our focus is in the Great Divide Basin, where we have our flagship property called Lost Creek. So we're south of Bear Oil, north of Rollins, kind of out there in the middle of no man's land. So that particular project, we permitted it in 2012, had it up and running in 2013, and we've been producing uranium there ever since. You may have seen in the press lately that we just had an expansion approved. We received the aquifer exemption, state permits, BLM plan of operations, all has been approved. So we've got 6 additional mine units there that we're going to continue to produce for many, many years to come. We have a lot of opportunity to explore there and to grow that resource. It's been a prolific operation. We're also moving into the Shirley Basin. Many of you are familiar with that project. Uranium mining started there in the very late 1950s. Started off as an underground mine. They had trouble keeping the water out of the mine. Somebody came up with the idea of in situ mining. They said, instead of fighting the water, why don't we work with the water? And so they invented in situ technology. By 1963, they had a pilot project going there. So we're really excited to bring in situ mining back to that project south of Casper, Wyoming. So we are publicly traded on the New York American and the Toronto exchanges, but pretty much all of our employees, we are Wyoming-centric. I do want to take a minute and thank the WEA for a grant that they issued to KMX Technologies. Not one of our companies, but it's a water treatment company. But that grant will enable them to install some water treatment technology at our Lost Creek mine. The industry in situ in general, we do a great job of recycling water. But as you guys all know, water is precious. And so we're always looking for better ways to squeeze a little more of that fresh water out and conserve it. And KMX Technologies has a great new technology that they're wanting to deploy and test, and WEA is making that possible. Thank you. So thank you, WEA, for that grant. We're looking forward to getting that installed at our Lost Creek mine. So,
awesome. Thanks, John. Wayne.
Thanks, Grayson, and hello, everybody. I'm glad to see that some people are willing to wake up in the morning and talk about uranium and listen about uranium. Appreciate WEA and the invitation to speak today. I'm the one on the panel who's not currently affiliated with a uranium company. But when I came to Wyoming in 1997, my first job was operations manager at Willow Creek, which is now UEC's project. And then I spent about 8 years with UR Energy and helped them establish the Lost Creek project. And pleased to say I was the one who hired John and brought him to Wyoming. We have a long history together of working as an industry, and I've been putting my footprints on projects all over the state. My last job was, which I just wrapped up earlier this year, was with Peninsula Energy and the Lance projects up in the northeast corner of Wyoming, and they're just getting ready to kick production into a higher gear. But I came into this industry as an engineer, and I've had a great opportunity, many great opportunities in the uranium mining industry in the state. So I'm just really happy to be here on this panel with Scott, who represents our industry so well and talks about markets, and as the leader of the Uranium Producers of America, John, who really loves to innovate in the industry and see things move forward. I think next to them, I'm probably just eye candy. So.
Awesome. Well, with that, we'll dive into the panel, Wyoming's Uranium Renaissance, Challenge and Opportunities Ahead. So as many here may know, Wyoming's quietly sat on top of the largest uranium resource in the United States, but there really hasn't been a lot of activity until now. So the United States imports 99% of its uranium last year, mostly from countries that don't really share our values. And we're hoping here to have a conversation on how that can be changed, especially with uranium. It's no longer a niche commodity. It's, powering clean energy and national security. So with that, kick it off with Scott. First question, the uranium market's finally getting global attention. What is driving this shift in fundamentals, and how are supply-side disruptions from Russia and Kazakhstan shaping U.S. strategy?
Yeah, no, listen, as someone who's been in the industry 42 years, I don't think I've ever seen a better thesis behind nuclear energy and uranium. And it's not just geopolitics, that's one big factor, but just, supply and demand of uranium. We've seen in recent years, public opinion, even political opinion, nuclear is essentially bipartisan supported these days. There's not many things back in Washington, D.C. Republicans and Democrats agree on, but they agree on the role of nuclear power. The left gets there for different reasons, for the carbon-free aspects of nuclear, while the right gets there for its abundant, affordable, reliant, resilient aspects, but they're all supportive. So it's not surprising we have demand for uranium doubling by 2040. That means a doubling of nuclear generation just from the existing reactors that are on the grid and running at higher capacity factors, longer lives, and some 440 reactors operating and another 60 to 70 that are under construction right now. That's on the backdrop of the aspirational goals set out by over 31 countries, 14 world leading banks, and 140 companies in the industry that are supporting the tripling of nuclear power by 2050. So we have a huge demand driver. Unfortunately, uranium suffered a 10-year bear market after Fukushima, where there was very little investment in exploration mine development, including here. There were some mines that had been brought into production and shut in, and those are the ones like John and I are operating that are kind of the early movers in this story, because we were in production, shut in, and now restarting. So supply and demand, there's a big structural deficit of about 50 million pounds presently. It grows to 1 billion pounds cumulatively in the next decade. We need a lot of new mines, and that would be just if the world was a perfect world and uranium was mobile and there were no geopolitics. But unfortunately, we have the influence of China and then Russia, Ukraine, and a desire to not be reliant on those countries for critical minerals, energy commodities, pharmaceuticals. We're really rethinking that sort of globalist approach that had opened up to them previously. So we need a lot more uranium mined in the West. Fortunately, the U.S. has underutilized its resources. Countries like Canada as well will probably double in the next decade. And then just the trend for energy. I mean, it's not just green energy transition. We need a lot of energy. We need oil, gas. We need nuclear. We need coal plants need to probably be running longer than they're slated currently to meet the demand for just baseload energy in the United States. Data center demand is kicking things into kind of exponential growth. But even before that, with electric vehicles, electrification of society, we're using a lot more electricity. And if we want to beat the Chinese on the AI rush and we want to avoid blackouts in the United States, we're going to need natural gas, nuclear, coal, all of the above to really keep up. So very exciting backdrop. It's not just geopolitics. We'll talk about some of the things we're doing to kind of get off that addiction, but it's really a whole combination of a number of factors that are really driving the best thesis for uranium and nuclear that I've ever seen.
No, and I think there's no question that the demand is here today and it's going to continue to rise. And so, with that, John, and focusing a little bit on geopolitics here, what are the continuing risks of continuing to rely on foreign supply? And then, how exposed is the United States today if those geopolitical tensions continue to escalate further?
Yeah, and Scott mentioned this, but we're heavily reliant on other nations, and you mentioned it in your opening statement too. A lot of them are not our allies, either in direct opposition to them or they're allied with other countries that we're kind of at loggerheads with. So it's a difficult situation. Right now in the U.S., us miners, We're providing, a very, very small fraction of U.S. demand. The U.S. reactors need pushing 50 million pounds a year. This year, maybe we'll do 1.5, maybe 2 million pounds of production. We have the ability to continue to ramp that up, but it's going to take time. It's going to take appropriate pricing for us to get there. Then if you look at the next stage in the fuel cycle, where we send our product is to the conversion facility. Here in the U.S., we only have one converter. It's in Metropolis, Illinois. It's a joint venture. Honeywell is the operator of that. They have about 1/3 of the capacity we need in the U.S. for conversion. All of the other conversion we get from allied nations and other countries around the world, formerly Russia. Russia is a major converter of material. The next step in the fuel cycle is enrichment. We have Urenco operating down in New Mexico, their Eunice facility. Similarly, they generate about 1/3 of our need of enrichment, so we have to rely on others for that as well. It's not really until you get to the back end of the fuel cycle, fuel fabrication, where we have sufficient capacity, but all of the front end and the middle steps, we are woefully inadequate here with our infrastructure. But each of those steps, I mean, the good news is each of those steps, we've got the capacity to grow that in the U.S. We have the technology, we have the people, we have the companies. We just have to have the financing, the government backing to be able to advance that. And I know we'll be talking more about permitting issues a little bit later on, but that's a significant impediment to the industry as a whole.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. And talking about tapping into the demand, Wayne, as John mentioned in his opening statement, ISR has been around for a long time. It's not new, but could you maybe touch on some of those innovations that are happening here in the United States that are further advancing ISR and helping with those economics to make us more competitive here?
Right. In the United States, we haven't been producing a lot of uranium for a couple of decades now, it seems, and the world has caught up. The United States used to be the world's leader in uranium production. Wyoming, a huge contributor to that. And you could look out and you say, why is it that we're falling behind? Why are we not economically competing with the global stage? And I think a lot of the answer, not technology at first, but access to capital. State-sponsored companies have low cost of capital, and they were able to develop uranium mines in a price-insensitive way and introduce uranium into markets in a price-insensitive way. But they also, John mentioned in situ recovery was really first developed in Shirley Basin here in Wyoming in the 1960s. On the other side of the globe, the Russians were developing in situ recovery as well, and they were using low pH or acid leach chemistries rather than the alkaline chemistries that were very prevalent here. And have been employed. So in recent years, we've been able to innovate, bring some of the global technology, the low pH chemistries to the state of Wyoming. Peninsula has been leading in that regard, with the advantage of being able to recover uranium at a faster pace using less volume of water. The chemistry is a little more effective than the very benign alkaline chemistry that we tend to employ here. A lot of good reasons to use alkaline chemistry. But if you have the right application for a low pH chemistry, you have an opportunity to produce uranium at a lower cost at a faster pace at your mine. So we've been seeing innovations in process chemistries and recovery chemistries. We also are innovating in the way of groundwater restoration and recovery. I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see significant gains in the reduction of the amount of water that's required to restore the aquifer after we employ in situ recovery technologies. A lot is going on there behind the scenes. I know that John works with a number of firms to do groundwater restoration improvements. I think the low pH chemistry is greatly misunderstood in regards to the ability to restore the groundwater, and there's going to be some significant demonstrations on a commercial basis there. And the world is going to see that the in-situ recovery industry can responsibly and efficiently recover uranium and restore aquifers and leave sites unblemished at the end of the day. That all's coming with the innovations that are importantly being looked at today.
I'll just jump in real quick, Grayson. Just to follow on with what Wayne was talking about, the industry, the price of uranium has been depressed for a long time, and it created a lot of atrophy in our industry. One of the things that we have not done a great job at, because the funding simply wasn't there, was R&D. But now that the price of uranium is back, we've reached stable pricing. More and more companies now are jumping back into R&D to advance that. Peninsula has done a great job on that. UR Energy, we're really advancing those things as well. In fact, within weeks now, we should have a new patent on a new well casing technology, so we're looking forward to having that in hand. But the U.S. government has also jumped in a big way through the Department of Energy. They are doing a number of research and development projects on groundwater restoration, sensor technology, attenuation, better lixiviant. So the U.S. government really has supported the industry, and some great R&D projects ongoing right now.
I think I'll add to that too. I think if you want to think of what ISR is to our industry here in the United States, it's the disruptive technology that allows us to compete with bigger programs and countries around the world, Canada, Kazakhstan, and we do it at in an environmentally very friendly way, which is a big plus. But it's also very low capital cost and low operating costs. So it's really allowing us to compete on an even basis.
This is actually really an area of passion for me, in innovating in this industry and leaving it in a better way than I came into it. I want to just throw this out to the room. You know, there's a lot of things we understand as process chemists and process engineers, you know, that we're using to improve. But probably the hardest thing and one of the biggest expenses for us today is exploration. Finding the ore bodies. It takes drill rigs, and we've already talked about, probably briefly, a scarcity of drill rigs. Groundwater well drilling capacity in this state, I'm throwing it out. We need more of it, and we need more innovation in the way that we identify and locate the roll front deposits that we exploit for in-situ recovery. There's a lot of room to improve in that. It's an expensive process to find an ore body. We probably spend between $3 and $5 a pound on discovery. And it's a drilling process, it's logging, it's manual, and it's time consuming, and there must be a better way. So I throw that out to the room, to the smart people in the room, and I know there's a lot of you. You know, if you want a business opportunity, start thinking about how to locate uranium underground and low-grade roll front type deposits.
And we are seeing a very positive trend. I mean, one of our constraining factors in growing production in ISR are people and drillers, drilling capacity. We are seeing drilling companies come back to Wyoming that may have left the state, gone to North Dakota, might have gone to Montana or elsewhere. Now that they see there's steady business in the uranium patch, we're able to give them, annual or multi-year contracts to drill for our operations. They are coming back into the state, but we can always use more.
Awesome. And yet earlier, Wayne, you had mentioned, a lack of sufficient capital going into the uranium industry. I believe from 2023 to 2024, private capital investments increased over 10x, but it was still under $1 billion in U.S. uranium. Could you guys maybe speak to, especially with the price of uranium hitting a high of over $100 in the spot market last year, what your guys' total cost of production is, what's driving those investment decisions, how much more capital does the U.S. uranium industry need? And, are you guys seeing a lot more further movement? Are we going to see another 10x this year or potentially higher? So maybe I'll start off with John, and then we can go around.
Yeah, our Lost Creek project, we have been well recognized as one of the lower cost producers in the U.S. When we're up and running and producing and going great guns like we were 2013, 14, 15, we can get down to about $45 a pound all-in cost at the mine site. Some inflation since then, so we know we're not going to quite get down to that, but we think we can get close to that as we ramp up to those economies of scale, which is absolutely critical. Our Shirley Basin project is going to be slightly more expensive. It's a little bit of a smaller project, so the cost will be a little bit higher because of that scale, but we're still looking at around $50 a pound to do that. Again, we're watching inflation very carefully. We'll probably be talking a little bit more about that here in a little bit. But when we are out seeking capital, one of the first things they're going to ask is what's your cost of production, what's your reliability of production, and as an industry here in Wyoming, we've got to be able to make that case and make the argument that, hey, we can compete with people around the world. It gets to the in situ technology that was developed, invented here in the state of Wyoming, and relying on that to be able to keep that cost really low and address those fluvial sandstone deposits that we are blessed with here in Wyoming.
Just a historical look back at production costs. In the late 90s, when I came into the industry, we were producing uranium for about $8 a pound. Yeah, and the market when I came into the industry was about $16 a pound, so there was money to be made at $8 a pound production costs. A lot of time has gone and a lot of water under the bridge. Today, the uranium market's $65 a pound. It was closer to 100 not too long ago, but our costs really truly are higher, and I don't think it's because the cherry picking and only mining the best deposits and the lowest cost deposits. It's that inflation and materials and labor and regulatory costs have all gone up significantly for the companies. So today, like John said, a $45 a pound production cost in the United States is a pretty good mark.
Yeah, I'll say like at $65 a pound, we're now up to today trading closer to 70 in the spot market. That has been sufficient enough to incentivize just the world's best lowest cost deposits. And I'm very proud to say that the three companies we're talking about here in Wyoming fit that bill because of this ISR technology and production costs in the 40s. But if you're going to want to incentivize big mines around the world, up in Canada, that may require $1 billion, $1.5 billion to develop, they're going to need $80, $90, $100 a pound sustained. So as encouraging as the price is today, we have a sufficient gap to fill. If that scares you, if you are a consumer of uranium and you're building reactors, that may sound terrifying, but uranium is only 5 to 10% of the generating cost of electricity in a nuclear power plant. So I think higher prices in the near term are a good thing for consumers of uranium because it's going to stimulate the investment in places like Wyoming to build new mines. I spent a lot of my time in capital markets, and I can say certainly a strong retail following, but we're seeing big institutional investors coming into our space because they see that nuclear power fits in the mix today, and it's going to need a lot of uranium, responsibly mined uranium, to fill that demand. So we're seeing investors like Norge Bank, the sovereign wealth fund of Norway, has a 5% stake in our company. So we're attracting the right kind of investment, and I think the pledge made by the 14 banks to triple nuclear power by 2050 kind of gives the permission that, hey, it's okay to invest in nuclear and uranium. I felt that there were times in my career that, when we talked about investments in nuclear or uranium, we were like lumped with, cigarettes, gambling, and prostitution in terms of what's acceptable for acceptable investing. And I feel now we've kind of gotten past that stage, and we're part of the global energy solution.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And maybe for those in the room that aren't really familiar with how uranium is purchased, could you guys kind of dive in a little bit? And it's a bit opaque on pricing, and maybe peel back the curtain a little bit on how you guys are looking at selling uranium to the spot, long-term contracts, where you see those going in the near future, and how you guys are approaching that.
Yeah, I'll take the first stab, but to get two other experts here on the panel here with me. The uranium market is very opaque. It's not like gold or copper where you have a clearinghouse where prices are published when there's a transaction and the whole world sees that and you know exactly what's going on. It's nothing further from the truth with uranium. The way the market has evolved is there are essentially two prices. There are many prices, but there are two fundamental prices that are published. They are not published by traders. They're published by essentially trade press. And so you've got the spot price, which is more or less an instantaneous price where you call up someone and say, hey, Joe, I need 100,000 pounds, can we transact in the next few days or few weeks? You sign a brief contract, you sell, the transaction happens very quickly. It's called spot or short term. The other market is the long term. It is typically more where the utilities play, not always, but typically. And that represents about 85%-ish, depending on the year, of the total market. Spot price typically is more like 15% of the market. But the utilities, they're conservative. They like those long-term contracts. They like to lock in price. Scott mentioned it, but right now, today, the spot price is at 70. The long-term price is at 80. They vacillate back and forth, depending on politics and what's going on there. Typically, the spot price is a lot more volatile because there are more transactions happening. They're typically smaller, but you get more view into that. The term prices with utilities typically are not as obvious and apparent. So those are the two markets that we, as an industry, trade into. But I'm sure these two gentlemen have a lot to fill in there.
Yeah, no, that's adequate description. I think the strategy that every company, mining company, takes is unique to their strategies, their investor base. At Uranium Energy Corp, we're not afraid of the spot market because we think fundamentally the market is undersupplied for the next 5-6 years, and we're going to see significantly higher prices in the spot market, which will also influence the long-term prices. But we tend to be more indexed to spot, less to the base prices. So with UEC, you get an unhedged investment. Obviously, we're operating with less of a safety net if prices go down, but we'll capture 100% of the market if prices go up. But there's not a right or wrong answer. Some companies have a 60-40 split between the long-term price and spot. Some are all long-term and some are all spot. But that's the spot market has been a little dysfunctional over the last year because the volumes have been very low. Utilities were kind of staying off the market to see how the Russian uranium ban that we'll talk about in a bit, how that is going to play out and be implemented. They're also kind of set back by the tariffs and wondering where that's going to go. But uranium is the oxygen of a nuclear power plant, and if they're holding their breath, they got to surface sooner rather than later because the plants are running 24/7. The requirements and demand is there. So if the last year and a half was a slow year in the market, that means we should have a more active both spot and long-term markets over the course of this year.
Nuclear power, needs uranium, and we have a very significant demand in the United States for uranium. Geopolitical forces and trends right now suggest that the availability of uranium from foreign sources is becoming limited. So I'm making 2 million pounds a year, theoretically. Who in the room thinks I should be able to name my price? Yeah, right. The uranium producers have been price takers pretty much throughout my entire career. And this is the challenge for running a business like uranium production is when you're a price taker, you don't get to decide. I'm the only guy in the room with the product, or one of the few people in the room with the product. I can't name my price. I have to take the price that's in the market. So, when you're trying to run a business responsibly, you want to go and sign some term contracts because you know that you can secure a margin for your operation. You can do things and be profitable. Term contracts are really important as long as you're signing a term contract that's profitable for your mine. As a businessman, you get crucified for term contracts because the capital markets want you to preserve your blue sky. The price is always going to go up, and you're always going to get a better price than what you just signed in the term contract. So it's a very difficult balance for the businesses to strike between securing term contracts and knowing that you're going to secure a margin on your effort and leaving and securing blue sky, especially if you're a price setter. That's a lot different story, but the story for producers in Wyoming and around the world really is we've been price takers, and the ones who set the lowest prices we're the state-sponsored, producers from foreign nations, and the people on this panel spent a good part of their career fighting that in various ways, and I want to just say I applaud that effort. That was so meaningful. That the market today is in a structurally better place, and prices are better for us to advance our projects.
I mean, I think absolutely true. I think we are, though, in a transition phase right now where we've had a market that has been in deficit for many years. That means we're producing far less globally than what we're consuming globally. So the gap has been made up by inventories and secondary supplies, which were obviously quite plentiful because the market was any sort of moderated price increases as a result. I think now, though, that the inventories have been drawn down to a level where we're pretty much at strategic excess inventories globally are largely depleted. It's now a phase of, it's a production-driven market, not inventory. So I think the balance of power is going to swing back more to those making the big investments to produce the uranium. So I'm confident that conditions are getting better. They already are already.
And I think that's a perfect segue. And we were talking about this. I've referenced, last year we imported 99% of our uranium, but I see a bifurcation in east of west, right? China's adding over 30 gigawatts of reactor capacity. Right now, over half our uranium comes from Kazakhstan. We talked about this last night, Scott. Almost all that uranium's going to from Kazakhstan is, going to China and Russia. I think, that could be the case for almost all of it, here in the near future. And so, as we look at that, and as you mentioned, Wayne, being price takers, I think a lot of people don't appreciate the difference between obligated versus unobligated uranium and why domestic uranium is so important in the United States. Maybe, Scott, if you could lead off just talking about the difference between obligated and unobligated uranium and what that means and how we can further, how that will further help advance domestic uranium here production in the U.S.
Sure. By obligated and unobligated, that's a term in international safeguards and international treaties and bilateral treaties between countries. Basically, it has to do with uranium that is available for commercial nuclear power, electricity generation, is material that's traded in the commercial markets. For my 42 years, we've never talked about the demand for uranium from the defense side of the business. We have 104 reactors in 84 submarines and aircraft carriers that have been operating constantly since the 1950s in the USS Nautilus. The reason we've never talked about unobligated uranium, that means uranium which is unobligated to global safeguards and can be used for defense purposes, that has to be US origin uranium. When we power a Virginia-class or Columbia-class nuclear submarine, it can't be Australian, Canadian, Kazakh. It has to be US origin. Why has it not been an issue until only recently? We had huge incentives in the 60s, 70s, and kind of tapered off in the 80s where the US government built up those stockpiles for our defense programs. Those are now coming to an end in the 2030s. And that may sound like a ways off, but in military terms and in mining terms, that might as well be tomorrow. So that's another thing to think about. It's, obviously US origin is attractive to global utilities and American US utilities because of the stability and the health, safety, and environment commitments and all the good stuff that we do at the operations. But we're also going to be in great demand by the naval nuclear propulsion programs and the defense side. So that could be obviously another very big boost to US uranium industry.
Awesome. And, so with that, and obviously, hopefully will be a major federal priority. Wayne, there's a growing buzz right now on the National Energy Dominance Council. How can Wyoming companies advocate, and what priorities are you all advocating in those conversations?
We're still really pushing to get uranium on the critical mineral list of all things. For some reason, uranium is not on the critical mineral list. It's a bad reason. They consider it a fuel, and oil and gas are not eligible to be on critical minerals. So, the UPA, and this is probably a question better for Scott, who does so much of that advocacy, but the UPA has pushed long and hard to get uranium on the critical minerals list. It gives us access to expedited licensing. and expedited licensing is really important. When you're trying to make a business decision on whether or not to open a mine, whether or not to restart a mine, or to start going exploring for uranium, you want to know that there's going to be price stability for the long term, because even the best of situations, 5 years is a short time frame to take a known deposit into production. Really talking about 10. Look, we have a company called Global Uranium. They just bought a large asset in the Powder River Basin, with an exploration target of 24 to 50 million pounds. They're saying, their ambition is to be in production in 5 years. I'm saying that's really ambitious because they don't even have a defined resource yet. But, I think realistically 10, but hey, if they can do it, they know they've put these people have put, mines together before and projects and permitted them. They know what it takes. It's a lot of work, and, but it starts with a known resource, and you need market stability. You need a clear path, and we're advocating for uranium being on the critical minerals list. That's probably the #1 ask right now. Because it gives us stability in the regulatory regimes that we really, really need.
And remember, uranium was put on the critical minerals list in the Trump first administration. It was taken off in the Biden administration. And now we are, as Wayne says, we're working to codify that through legislation to get it on the list. But President Trump is already treating it as a critical minerals. All these executive orders to establish American energy or critical minerals leadership, say critical minerals and uranium. So we're already seeing the love from that perspective. And it is important because we have, as the Uranium Producers of America, we have 6 members that have now restarted or are restarting uranium production in the United States. But we have probably another 15 members that fall in that camp of exploration and development. And they want to get to the point where these companies are today in production. And many of us went through 6, 7, 8 year permitting timelines to get these projects permitted. That shouldn't take that long. And I think President Trump and the Department of Interior and the Energy Dominance Council recognize that if there are barriers to permitting and licensing that exist in the federal agencies, bring them to the attention of the White House and the federal permitting dashboard, which is now named 20 mining projects in the United States, 2 uranium projects for that permitting dashboard. This is great. This is transparency. We talked a bit about it yesterday, that the federal process is certainly being shortened for permitting and licensing new mines. And I think states like Wyoming, Texas, agreement states are more than welcome to also keep up that pace and bring new deposits to the point where we can have new mines, not just the existing mines that are already built or permitted.
I'll add though, Wyoming, kudos. This is the place where we want to do business. Because Wyoming became an agreement state a few years back, that means that we have primacy on a lot of our regulatory work. And the state of Wyoming has done a really good job of running the uranium recovery group and regulatory authorities taking over from the NRC. It was exactly what the industry wanted at that time, and we got exactly what we hoped for. So, the state of Wyoming is the place that draws the most attention for uranium exploration now, and for uranium production opportunities, because we've put this state in a good position on a regulatory front. We're on the front foot, and businesses from all our companies all around the world want to do business in Wyoming when it comes to uranium. And we have exploration in the Gas Hills. We have a Canadian company looking in the Owl Creeks. We have exploration in the Great Divide Basin. We have exploration all over the Powder River Basin. There's a lot of companies that are trying to get uranium deposits put together in Wyoming because this is a great state to do this business.
Awesome. So in addition to adding uranium to the critical minerals list, if you all could have one big ask for this new administration to really unlock uranium production in the U.S., what would it be? We could start with you, Scott.
Yeah, well, I'll just talk about some of the successes we have had to date. In the last Congress, we were able to pass the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, which directs billions in funding towards revitalization of uranium conversion enrichment in the United States. We passed the Russian uranium ban, albeit with some waivers through 2027. It was kind of a necessary evil in the negotiations to get the utilities on board with that. But if we can keep the Russians out from dumping in uranium in our industry and destroying our domestic capabilities, that's hugely, very, very much helpful. Where we are today, certainly the critical minerals activities underway, trying to get that legislative and codified. We're also looking to expand the Russia ban to China. We've had evidence in the last year or so, 2 years, where the Chinese are now working with the Russians to circumvent the ban with the shell game that you see with maybe oil sanctions on Iran or Russia, where they'll ship to a third country, change the flag, and bring it back into the United States. We're on to that. Commerce is on to that. Congress is on to that. So I think extending the ban to China certainly would be a big deal. We have a Section 232 investigation that was now initiated by the White House, not by industry, but that is an investigation into harm that can be done to national or energy security or economic security from imports of uranium. And for us, we're really focusing that effort on those state-owned enterprises. I don't think we have issues with Canada, but we do have issues with China and Russia. And then finally, the permitting reform is already underway. I mean, this administration is just moving at light speed to permit and license critical minerals, including uranium. So that was a lot of asks, but we see a lot of things positive happening.
Grayson, I take your question to mean if you could wake up on Christmas morning,
100%.
what's in the present? So I'm going to go for it. I'm going to touch the third rail here. Scott touched on permitting. Let's talk about NEPA. NEPA's got to go away. NEPA is nothing more than a process law. It has no impact on environmental protections. What I mean by that, if you look at the NEPA regulation, there are no PM10 laws or groundwater discharge laws. It's all process. Right now, our federal agencies are in a quagmire of NEPA. They cannot take their professional scientists and dedicate them to the things that they should be dedicated and looking at. Right now, people who are opposed to progress, whether that's building a bridge or a uranium mine or anything in between, they use NEPA as a tool to go to the courts, slow projects and kill projects. So if I could beseech President Trump and Congress with my one request, it is kill NEPA. I don't think there is any way that it can be refurbished, rehashed, restated. There's no need for it. We have adequate environmental regulations in place already. We have opportunities for public comment. It's all there. It's all built. NEPA is nothing more than a layer on top of that that's a bureaucratic quagmire. Let's get rid of it.
Awesome.
John,
Follow that.
you've inspired me to tilt at windmills.
You got to ask.
You got to ask. And if I was to tilt at a windmill, I've said this many, many times, a long, long time ago in a different time frame, the federal government put a moratorium on patenting federal mining claims. We do a lot of business on federal land, and it would be a lot more appealing for us to do business on federal land if we could patent the mining claim. We put a lot of investment into exploring for and discovering the mineral. We put a lot of money into investing in the mineral. Patenting mining claims means that we would no longer have to lease it, but we'd own that land. There's now discussion breaking in the Trump administration about selling federal land. And if there's ever been a window to tap into the end of the perpetual moratorium on patenting federal mining claims, this might be the one window that cracks open. But I think really more importantly, EPA Region 8 Administrator Western was here yesterday, and he says, my job is I got to stand out of the way. Even though Wyoming has a great regulatory program. We still get oversight from the federal agencies. The state of Wyoming does, and EPA processes have shifted back and forth with administrations. Some motivated to get things done, and some motivated to prevent things from getting done. And we're presently in what we perceive as a better environment. But if we can fix that so that it doesn't change every time we elect a new president, then we'd have more stability in our permitting processes. And again, efficiency in permitting is really where we have to go, because you can't get investors to the table when you say it's going to take me 10 years before you see a return on investment. There's something better to go and invest in right now. So, our business needs investors. Our business needs stability and efficiency in regulatory process, and that's probably more important than patent name federal mining claims, but that's always been one of my things.
Love it. No, all great responses. So switching gears here a little bit, John, could you maybe talk a little bit about the current tariff climate and what the impact, this climate's having on U.S. uranium production?
Yeah, that's the question du jour. That's what I get from my investors all the time since Trump began his administration. So right now there are no tariffs on uranium coming into the U.S. There are some bans in place. But as far as getting material from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, other places, there are no tariffs in place. They've not really been suggested seriously. I would say that most U.S. producers, when we produce a pound of yellowcake, most of us would ship to ConverDyn, stays here in the U.S., or potentially goes up into Canada to be processed by Cameco. But right now, there are no tariffs on any of that. So right now, where we stand right now, no tariffs, and really no serious discussion of those tariffs. It's important to notice that the biggest reactor fleet in the world is still here in the U.S. So when we go and market uranium, we can market in most of the countries around the world, but we prefer to market here in the U.S. That's where the biggest customer base is. That's where most of the sales occur. So when we sell that product, that transaction occurs at the ConverDyn facility in Metropolis, Illinois. So we're not subject to tariffs, even if tariffs were put into place. But it is something we watch very carefully. It certainly could have a dramatic impact on the market, depending on what nations would be tariffed and what those conditions are coming into the U.S. The other side of that is we have to look not just at what we produce and sell, but we have to look at the impact on our operations through buying equipment, supplies, equipment, instrumentation. We're building out a mine right now at Shirley Basin, so we're very carefully watching tariffs and the impact. What we've seen so far is we're in pretty good shape, with one exception, and that's instrumentation. So we have had to pivot away from imports of instrumentation, Siemens, out of Germany, and we have transitioned over to U.S. providers of instrumentation like Allen Bradley and others. So there are a couple of facets to tariffs, but right now it's something that I think the industry can navigate reasonably well, but we have to watch it.
Awesome. And I know we're running close here on time. So switching to another topic, strategic uranium reserve. It was quite a hot topic during Trump 1. There was $75 million. I think all of you all sitting here would want that number to be a bit higher. Could you guys just talk a little bit about what the objective was for the strategic uranium reserve, what the current status is, and in a dream world, where would you like to see that program furthered?
Yeah, well, it's important to note that the Strategic Uranium Reserve was an offshoot of the Section 232 investigation a couple years back. And in the Trump administration at the time, President Trump decided not to go to the quotas or other remedies, but instituted a working group of all the agencies and departments to determine, is there a threat to energy and economic security from imports? They determined that it was. And we need to revitalize our domestic industry. And so one of their recommendations was to establish, I want to say it was a 10-year, $1.5 billion project to buy uranium to stockpile that U.S. origin uranium. The first year was funded at half the annual amount, and it benefited a number of our member companies. I think we all realized nice premium prices because of the scarcity at the time of U.S. origin uranium. We're actively encouraging a continuation of that. And that could be, an outcome of the current Section 232 investigation. We just have to go to President Trump and say, your recommendations, first time, still apply. They're even more true today. And remember the U.S. origin unobligated issue. That uranium that we sold into the strategic reserve, last time was quickly ring-fenced by the NNSA of the Department of Energy, which supplies fuel for the Naval Propulsion Program. So remember, there is an energy security aspect to extending the strategic reserve, and I think that's great policy.
And then, John, I think we would all agree that this cycle is different from prior cycles, and the uranium industry has had historically a lot of boom and bust periods. Could you talk about why this cycle, in your opinion, is different from the rest, and how you see that being sustained for decades to come?
Yeah, I mean, Scott touched on this very early on. It's to a large degree based on the carbon-free baseload attributes of nuclear power. And so you've got countries around the world that are moving hard toward clean energy, wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, and we're a part of that story. And that's sticky. It's not going away. The booms and bust cycles we've seen in the past didn't have that tailwind behind it. It was based on other fundamentals. But right now, what we've seen in the spot market and the term market is it's good. Staying good. It's not hitting a peak because of some natural disaster affecting a mine and then coming down, 2 weeks later. We've been at $80 a pound for the long-term price now for many, many months, which for us is a fantastic price. We're really happy it's there. So you've got that tailwind. Speaking specifically to U.S. in situ producers, there is a lot of interest in our product on all of us on the stage and our competitors here in the U.S. because companies like the safety of the U.S. It's a safe jurisdiction to work. They love Wyoming. The utilities love Wyoming because of that. And they love in situ. We have one customer out of Europe that they are very interested in our CO2 emissions on a per pound of uranium produced basis. What they have found is in situ producers here in Wyoming, our emissions on a production basis are lower than anybody in the world. So that allows them to come in and buy our production and commingle that with their other production around the world and still meet their targets. And in the European Union, they are very serious about that. You see various levels of seriousness and belief on that here in the U.S., but let me tell you, in Europe, that is a serious issue. And that does give us a premium, but it puts a lot more demand on us, longevity of contracts as well. So, yeah, but it's a carbon issue. It's a national security issue. Nuclear is fantastic base load. Big data is a kind of a come lately to the party. But we have customers we are selling to that we know our product here in Wyoming is going to big data. And we didn't have that literally 2 years ago. That conversation didn't exist. So it's just a totally new dynamic, and it looks like it's going to stay.
So just pulling up on the big data piece, do you all see that as a key element to that sustaining further advanced growth, or is that just an add-on and just cherry on top? Yeah,
it's icing on the cake.
Yeah, I would agree. The doubling of nuclear power by 2040 is largely the existing large reactors. How we're going to get to tripling is the small modular advanced and micro reactors that we're discussing here in Wyoming. I mean, that is going to revolutionize the way energy is generated and distributed in 2030 on. Of course, we're trying to get the first of a kind plants built and demonstrated before then, but don't underestimate the applications. I mean, with data centers, you've either got the saying is that it's most difficult to transport molecules. It's next easiest to transport electrons, but light in the form of data can go anywhere in the world. And so either data centers need to be sited where the natural gas is, if that's the power source, or in terms of nuclear, we can bring small modular and micro reactors to the data centers and achieve that goal.
Excellent. And we'll one more question, we'll turn it over to Rob for audience questions. But as we see this major ramp up in the U.S. uranium production, what is the impact on Wyoming? How are you guys, sourcing those jobs? Do we have enough, available talent here in Wyoming? How are you all thinking about that as you all continue to ramp up?
Well, let's define a ramp up. And right now in Wyoming, we have about 20 million pounds of annual production capacity licensed in our uranium mines. We're just getting our mines back up and running. And John said, we might produce 1.5 million pounds this year. The economic impact of producing 20 million pounds a year in Wyoming could be, $1 to $2 billion a year in sales. At, just say $60 to $100 a pound. And we pay severance tax. We pay severance tax on the order of 4%. A 4% severance tax on $1 billion, $40 million. On $2 billion, it's $80 million of severance tax, the state of Wyoming, but we are employing people. We're high-paying, good jobs. We're competing with everybody else for the limited Wyoming labor pool. It can be challenging. Uranium mines probably not first and foremost on the minds of our youth as to where they would find a good career, but I'm here to tell you I found a good career in uranium. I think it'll take me through to the end and I'll know nothing else. And, from day one to day whatever. But there's talent. We have organizations fostering, youth, proud to be a part of the Central Wyoming SME section, which Thursday night is going to give out about $20,000 in scholarships, almost all of it to Wyoming, University of Wyoming and Casper College students, to promote careers in uranium. And so there's talent out there. We just have to let them know that if you choose to be in this industry, you have the opportunity to have a long and fulfilling career.
Just to give you some numbers so you can kind of keep things in context. Very roughly, for a 1 million pound a year in situ mine, you need about 55 people on site. And in addition to that, you're going to need 10 administration, engineering, accountants, things like that. So just put that into context. Right now with UR Energy, we have about 120 people on staff. We're going to be looking to hire about 40 more here in the coming months as we bring Shirley Basin on. But I really wanted to make sure I stated up here today that our biggest challenge has been and continues to be manpower, finding qualified people. So if there are legislators out there, WEA, please be aware that is the #1 challenge for our industry. Whether that be hourly unskilled labor that we train or whether that be engineers and scientists, the entire spectrum, it has been very challenging. As we have become more stable in production, longevity, that is resolving itself, but it is not resolved. So be aware of that. And when you see an opportunity to address that through legislation or other activities, please keep us in mind.
Yeah, John's absolutely right. The constraining factors for more production from in situ mining in the United States and here in Wyoming is drilling, contractors, and people. The employment has been very real for our company. We've hired over 50 people in the last 12 months, skilled positions, laborers, professional people. We are attracting people in the uranium industry to come here because of the activity that we're engaged in, but we're also taking people from other disciplines. Like our type of mining is more like managing an oil and gas or gas well field. It's a lot of pumps, pipes, valves, drilling, and so we are taking people from other industries, even coal in terms of our operators at our plant, and training them to be uranium miners. So, but we need to do a lot more of that or we'll be constrained at how fast we can grow in Wyoming.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll turn it over to Rob for audience questions.
Perfect, thank you all. It's been a great discussion this morning. First one, can you provide some context around the megatons to megawatts program and how that's influenced our domestic uranium market?
Yeah, boy, megatons to megawatts was a program that happened at the breakup of the Soviet Union where the United States and other Western countries encouraged Russia to dismantle 21,000 warheads and take the blended down uranium, and we sold it in the West, largely most of that in the United States. So for a period of close to 10 years, 50% of the uranium for our nuclear power plants in the United States were powered by that incredible non-proliferation success. Of course, who took the hit on that was the U.S. uranium industry, because we had to kind of step back and step down while that material was digested over that period of time. So it was a huge success in terms of global peace. I don't think there's much room for it now. Unfortunately, I think the countries that have nuclear weapons are probably holding on to them at this stage. But yeah, that program came to an end. We then had Russian dumping of uranium in the market from commercial sources, but we've addressed that through the ban. But it was incredible non-proliferation success when it was in place.
Great, thank you. And John, this next one might be to you. You talked a little bit about conversion. Someone in the crowd's wondering about workforce, which I know you guys touched on, but the second part of their question is any potential for uranium conversion in Wyoming. And I'll preface that with, you heard yesterday about some fuel fabrication that we're certainly looking at and some opportunity there. And you talked about the fuel supply chain, but where do you see as really an opportunity for Wyoming within that?
I'm a big cheerleader for Wyoming. Anyway, anytime I'm back in DC or New York with investors or talking to other banks, hedge funds, Wyoming is a great place to do business. Having said that, bringing conversion to Wyoming, it's a heavy lift. Do I think it's possible? I do think it's possible, but it's going to take a concerted effort on the part of the government to go out, develop those relationships with the big name players. This would be a multi-billion-dollar project. It's a big chemical processing plant is what it is. But I do think it's possible. It certainly, conversion right now is the #1 constraint in the nuclear fuel cycle. And there is room for additional capacity, and I would love to see that in Wyoming. So I won't bet on the odds. It's a heavy lift, but I think the people that need to do it are in this room. The abilities are here.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I see good things happening on the uranium front. I see good things happening on the enrichment front. You have companies like General Matter that wants to develop their enrichment technology here in Wyoming. Let me just say, I think the conditions have never been better for a new U.S. conversion facility, and for a lot of reasons, Wyoming is an ideal location. And I guess what I would say is just stay tuned, because I think there are, there are some wheels in motion on that front. But yeah, would love to see conversion plant here in Wyoming, and we could complete the whole fuel cycle and go from mining all the way to reactors. It would be incredible for the state.
Yeah, we talked about people. People would be a challenge. We need hundreds of people. A lot of these are very skilled chemists, physicists to embark on that. So people would be one of the big challenges.
State's going to have to get used to a lot of people moving here, if that's okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to merge a couple because I know we're running short on time. At the very end of the cycle, as you all know, is the storage of that material. Obviously, a hot topic in Wyoming and all states that are looking at nuclear as an option. So how have you guys seen sort of the perception of uranium and nuclear sort of change over the years, the sort of not in my backyard mentality, where that kind of stands today? And if you had a crystal ball, where do you think there would be a storage site, or do you see a storage site in the near future?
Yeah, listen, the not in my backyard is a funny thing. We often use that terminology with nuclear, but anyone who lives in the vicinity and works in a nuclear power plant actually want those plants to continue to operating longer, and they want to get the small modular and advanced reactors to their communities because they know how safe they are, they know the economic benefits and the employment that comes with it. So I think there are huge changes there. Listen, on waste in the nuclear space, it's not a scientific challenge. You have two main solutions. You either dispose of in geologic formations that haven't changed in a billion years, or you recycle. And in the interim, you store spent fuel in concrete and steel casks that are almost indestructible. I mean, they are indestructible. And that's sort of the interim stage where, until we decide as a nation, do we want to reprocess or store in geologic formations, the fuel's still there. It's not a huge problem. If you want to put it into context, all the nuclear fuel that's been generated from nuclear power plants since the 1960s in the United States would fit on a football field. So it seems like it's a huge insurmountable problem. It isn't. The interim storage does give us opportunity to let some breakthroughs in technology, whether it's reprocessing or storage, come out. But I think the bottom line is, in the United States, you're never going to have a community forced to take something. It's something that they're going to want to take, and they're going to have the appropriate incentives to do that.
Yeah, I've already touched one of the third rails today, so I'll be careful on this topic. But just one thing I want to reiterate that Scott has already said is this is not a technical problem. This is a perception problem. And I think if any state, whether that's Wyoming or Nevada or New Mexico, doesn't matter, that's considering that, I think that's going to require a lot of education and it's going to take time, but it is not a technical constraint.
We have 50 years of commercial nuclear reactor life, longer than that, since the early 1970s. And all of that fuel has been safely stored in the United States. There's about 40 sites around the country right now that store spent nuclear fuel and never an incident. We just have to, understand that what John said, it's a safe, understood technology. There's really very, very, very low risk with spent nuclear fuel storage, and we can do that safely. And we don't have to become a repository in the state of Wyoming if that's not the direction we want. But in order to attract the types of businesses and nuclear industry that we want, we have to be open as a community, as a state, to look at and properly evaluate the risks of these sorts of things. And I think you'll find that the nuclear industry in the United States is exemplary for its safety and its safety record.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a perfect one to end on. I really appreciate your guys' time and the great discussion this morning. If everybody could help me in thanking the panel. All right, next up, we will have a panel talking about investment in this sort of capital market landscape for energy right now. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Josh Durrell, the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council, Mayor Shea Lundvall of the City of Gillette, and Dan Stevens, Senior Partner of McKinsey & Company, and yours truly will be moderating this panel.
So am I opening for Dan and Shay, or what's this?
Yeah, I like it. Our next album's going Illuminate.
Let's make it go.
Look at you go.
All righty, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. First, thank you all for being here. I think this panel is super timely when we talk about I talked about this a little bit yesterday, the work that we do at the Energy Authority. A big thing we do is the energy matching funds. You heard about multiple grants from companies and folks that were up on panels yesterday and today and sort of driving the economy forward. But I think the beauty about this panel today is we'll have representatives from the local communities, the statewide, as well as nationally to sort of talk about what are we seeing in market trends? What are we seeing as the impacts of these grants and these projects in local communities? And what do we need to do going forward? So first, I'd kind of like each panelist to be able to go through and introduce themselves, talk about what they do, and sort of their perspective on the energy landscape. So first, we'll start with you, Mayor Lundvall. Obviously, you're from Gillette. They know a little bit about energy up in that region. So if you could talk about, one, your day-to-day role, but also how Gillette's been a longtime leader in the energy space.
Well, good morning, everybody. For those of you that I have not met, my name is Shea Lundvall. I am the mayor of Gillette. So thank you, Rob, for this opportunity. It's been exciting for me to be able to do this. So when I first started my career, I was born and raised in Gillette. My family is pure coal and methane family. I had the privilege of working at Arch Coal, and then I tried to help get through college. I worked in the methane fields on the rigs. And so I know what it takes for the hard work and the dedication that it's and the privilege that it's given my family over the years. And so I went off to college and then moved back to Gillette, started working for the city, and that's when I started, and then I went into the private sector, and that's when I started my career in politics. And so it was in 2016 when I first ran, got elected, and in 2020 ran again, and then 22 I was elected as the mayor. So it's been an exciting journey for me because we've come a long way where we have, and in Gillette, as many of you know, we have led the charge in energy, but I think in some ways we've been complacent. And I think we've just been able to coast because all those revenues have come in. And thanks to our predecessors for building infrastructure and things like that, but it's not good enough. We want to get better. We want to continue to strive for excellence. We want to continue to innovate and create partnerships where we can. And those are things that I'm very passionate about. And we're seeing the fruits of that right now. And we'll probably touch on this here in a little bit, but creating these partnerships from the federal, state, and local levels is a tremendous opportunity. And one thing that you'll learn about me is I'm very competitive. And I think most of you in here are, because everybody likes to win. And success begets success. And when you see those partnerships take place, you win. And it's exciting, and it's invigorating, and people want to see that. So I've had the privilege of now visiting with folks from the international level, and wanting to come and invest in Gillette. And man, I can't tell you how awesome that is, because that just is a testimony to the team we've created at the city of Gillette, where people want to come and work for us. They want to be a part of something great. And I just get the pleasure and honor to be able to sit up here and tell that story. And so it's thanks to those guys to be able to do the grind. But we'll get into that a little bit more, Rob.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Dan, next I'll go to you. I know your title is a senior partner at McKinsey & Company, but McKinsey covers everything. So if you could talk a little bit on your specific focus as it relates to energy.
Yeah. So I run our energy finance and investing practice. So I spend all my time with equity and debt investors looking at the energy space, which is looking at specific assets and deciding whether or not to make an investment, setting portfolio strategies and how they want to shift the balance of their portfolio over time, or assets they've got that are struggling that they need to go in and operationally improve. We would do all three of those things. Based in DC, so I also lead our relationship with the Department of Energy and a bunch of energy work at DoD.
Great, thank you. And next, Josh, if you could talk about, is it 6 years now you've been the CEO? 5 years, okay. Well, I remember when my old role, I was in the governor's office, and we were lucky enough to bring on Josh and really start to lead the business council and change some things. Could you talk about some of the work you've done there and sort of the direction that you've taken the business council?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and thank you all for being here. This is a lot of fun because I think in terms of trajectory, the things have changed quite a bit at the Business Council. But I'm a kid who grew up in Rawlins, Wyoming, the son of a coal miner, and he mined coal in Hanna for his whole career through the ups and downs, and so I got to see that firsthand. And when I had the opportunity to take on the Business Council, I thought it was all about business because that's where I'd spent all my time. And what I realized is that while we're called the Wyoming Business Council, we're really about building local capacity and local communities to be stronger and stronger. And so through our programs, we're able to lever that and to try to create that. But it's really that partnership between the locals, the business community, the state. All of those partnerships are incredibly important. One of the things that we've really taken a look at is our investments in what we call business-ready communities. And I think it's a program that a lot of people know, but not a lot of people know well. And so we took that in a different direction and really pushed hard on generating return on investment of state funds. How do we take the investments that we make in a community to make it better for the business community and lever that so that it returns a positive investment to the state? And over the last few years, we've definitely turned that and changed the trajectory of that program. It's been an important program. But I think what it's really done for us, Rob, and folks out there, it's really helped us understand the big challenge that Wyoming communities face. And I think until you get on the ground and you start doing those projects, you don't really understand the boundary conditions that we're working with. And so it's been a really eye-opening experience over the last 5 years. Got a great team of about 40 people, and we're really excited about I think the next chapter for the state.
Well, great, thank you. And yeah, I appreciate the partnership with all of you and the Business Council in particular, because as I mentioned, we have the energy matching funds, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so one of the great partnerships we have is if a company comes to us and maybe it doesn't fit the energy matching funds, we know of another program within the state as the BRC program that could be a fit. And we've seen some possibilities go through that. So really Wyoming just has a whole, I always say a whole of government, but it's really a whole of state approach as we look at these projects and trying to attract them to Wyoming. So Mr. Mayor, back to you. You sort of talked about complacency, and my quote I talked about yesterday is competition eliminates that. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective and your openness to nuclear? I think that's something that, TerraPower, I know we have representatives from TerraPower here in the audience, was really the starting gun in the state for nuclear reactors being built. And since then, it's kind of crazy to think that was only back in 2020, right? And all the development we've seen with their project, with other folks looking at here, and particularly some folks looking to Gillette. And I think it's been really remarkable, the interest and the welcoming nature that you've provided. So if you could talk a bit about your guys' openness to nuclear.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So this was back in 2020. I actually had the privilege of working for a company who actually bid on the dirt work for that project. And it was, at that time, first of its kind. And we secured that project working with the general contractor, Bechtel. And so that's really kind of the start for me. And then I realized that this play is bigger. It's much bigger than what I think at the time I realized. But I also know from my experiences and just talking with a lot smarter people than me, but we wanted to be at the center of that. And I wanted to be at the center of that. I wanted to be at the table. I wanted to have those conversations. I didn't want anybody else to tell Gillette's story because I've believed in Gillette when I ran back in 2016, and as for mayor, I guess the slogan is unlocking Gillette's potential. And I think that's part of the nature of what I've kind of worked off of, because I know and I've lived it and breathed it my whole life. And when I get to travel the country and experience and talk to folks, they don't know where Gillette is sometimes, but I want everybody to know where Gillette is. And through those conversations, we've been able to meet folks and get to experience and tell our story and provide a streamlined approach at the local level with what we can and where we can, and that let them know, like, hey, we want you here, right? Like, we want you to be a part of Gillette community. We want to see your success, and I'm committed to that. And I think this council that I'm a part of is committed to that. So I'm not giving up on that, and those that we're seeing it, we're starting to see those fruits. I didn't think it was going to happen as fast, but I'm very grateful for those conversations and those relationships that we've been able to cultivate and really drive forward where we're at and where we're headed. I mean, truthfully, Gillette is on the map in a different way, but it's exciting to be a part of that in this small way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When I go around the country talking about just all the energy development we have in Wyoming, lots of times folks say, how is that possible? Well, one, obviously we're blessed with all the resources, but two, it's really the mindset that we have, right? We're not, if a new industry is looking to come here, we don't say, no, we're good how we are. We do welcome that. We do want to see new energy development, and we want that to take place in the state. So I think you and your role as mayor and Gillette as a whole has really been a good example of that. So, Dan, since you are not elected or working in direct politics here in the state, I'm going to ask you the easy question of, how have the elections federally impacted sort of the energy capital markets? I think we've heard about it yesterday, a little bit this morning too, about, these companies are planning 20, 30, 40 years out. Yeah. We're seeing pendulum swings in DC every 4 to 8 years. How have you seen that really impacting the markets as energy investment and capital?
Yeah, that's a good, let me talk through the landscape, because I think it varies across sectors. Let me start with natural gas, where I think it's been fine, that the fundamentals of demand are so strong in the U.S. and globally, and the U.S. is so well positioned that, of course, you see some pricing volatility. But I think for most investors, their comfort with making long-term bets in that space has been consistent. Oil's probably somewhere similar. There's more global volatility, price volatility, and the U.S. isn't quite as strongly positioned as we are in natural gas. And it's more of a global commodity, so you have to worry more about global security issues. But I think, again, most folks in the oil industry are used to volatility. U.S. political volatility hasn't, changed that equation for them. There's a set of things where the fundamentals are strong, but government could further accelerate the investment case. I think power generation, new build of power generation in the U.S. is like that. Transmission and distribution in the U.S. is like that. Those are segments where investors have high confidence, and there's plenty of money available. Were you to address things like permitting and interconnection, you would see more money available because they'd be better investments. There's a set of things that I think there's real excitement about. The previous panel talked about nuclear, and that would certainly be in that bucket. I think geothermal is also there, where there's lots of institutional investor money very interested in those spaces, looking for how to play them. There's some uncertainty, but eager to figure out a way to get in. And then there's a set of things, I think solar and storage are in this bucket, where the fundamentals are very strong, but until the tariff situation is resolved, it's very hard to be a storage developer these days because you just don't, the single biggest chunk of your costs, you don't know what it costs. So it's hard to pencil out a new deal. And then at the tail end, I think there's things, I think green hydrogen's a good example of, that's one where or offshore wind would be another, where the changes in the political environment have been most felt. Both of those, probably the fundamentals weren't that strong beneath them already, that it isn't purely a political change, that the market demand and the cost of capital for both of them was already a hindrance, and the political change is sort of just exposing what was already an issue.
And I'll follow up on that a little bit, because we heard yesterday about tax credits, right? And I think it's good for folks to understand, especially policymakers, that some of those tax credits actually were in place well before the Biden administration, before the first Trump administration. But that doesn't negate the fact that they are important to some of these projects. And the sort of alphabet soup, I said 45Q, we've worked on 48C, I've heard all sorts of different credits that are out there. I know the future of those is kind of questionable right now, but to your best guess, which ones do you see sort of rising to the top? I know that's a softball, is ones that maybe will last, and if they don't, how much do you think that does impact some of the energy development projects that maybe took place over the last 4 to 8 years?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of what's going to survive versus not, I don't know. Because the reason I say that is they all represent pay-fors. There's a lot of other pay-fors, like the SALT cap, for example, and the margins in the House are so thin. What constellation of votes you put together and what pay-fors that protects and doesn't protect, I think it'd be pretty hard to predict. Even for the professionals, I think it's pretty hard to predict. I'll tell you what I think from an industry standpoint, if you thought about sort of U.S. energy security and national security, I think the tax credits that support new power generation are really positive, because we're short power. I think the tax credits that support carbon capture and storage are very helpful, because it is good for us if the natural gas industry can prolong its global life by capturing carbon. That's a good thing for the U.S. It creates durability for our global competitiveness. I don't think I think if you got rid of the green hydrogen tax credits, that would probably have the smallest effect. There just aren't that many projects. So I suspect that one is highly at risk, if I had to guess. And then, electric vehicles is a bit of when you combine the tax credit issues with the tariff issues on electric vehicles, I think depending on who you ask in the automotive industry, you get different views of what is likely and what is preferred, because there are competitive dynamics of some firms would like different outcomes than others. I don't know what's going to happen, though.
Okay. Josh, this next one's to you. I think one of the hardest parts about the Business Council is in Wyoming's economy is you guys are charged with economic development. And lots of times a phrase that goes with that is diversifying our economy. We heard Pete Obermueller talk about it a little bit yesterday, but in Wyoming, we're truly blessed to have a very low tax burden as individuals in this state, and that's for really one reason. It's coal, oil, gas, uranium, our mining industry that pays, upwards of 65% of the taxes in this state. So when we talk about economic development and diversification, maybe outside of minerals, it gets tricky really quick. So how have you sort of navigated that, but also how have you embraced that in your role at the Business Council?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, because if you think about we could call it the tax structure if you want, but it's actually an incentive structure from an economic perspective. And I don't mean like incentives like here's some money, go do something. I mean it at a local level, there is no incentive for growth. And if you think about that, that makes it really hard to grow. And from a basic economic structure, you need growth to survive, to win. You need growth. And that is as somebody mentioned, somebody's gonna, in the last panel, Wyoming's gonna have to grow, and that's grow by a lot of people, and they were talking hundreds and things, and I'm thinking to myself, that's not a lot of people. It's actually not a lot of people. We're probably gonna have to grow by more, which is gonna sound even more controversial, and I'll be out in the lobby in a minute, and you can all talk to me about that, but it's actually gonna be more. But the challenge we face from an economic development standpoint is it is really hard to create growth in an area that the system stagnates growth, because again, the incentives aren't aligned. If you want your town to grow and your tax base not to, that doesn't happen. It does not happen. That's why we see the size of communities that we see, because we're not actually incentivizing the growth of a community for human potential. We incentivize for the extraction, tourist, or ag economies. Nothing wrong with that. I think it's about and, not about or. I think that's where we get tripped up all the time, is that people are like, well, you can't throw away this to do this. Exactly right. It has to be an and. And I think that incentive alignment from an economic standpoint, and the fact that we're going to need a whole lot more people working together, is really where we need to go. So it makes economic development extremely tricky in the areas that the Business Council works, which is sort of like all of the non-traditional industries.
Great, thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, back to you. You talked a little bit about some of the international attention that Gillette is getting in particular. I often, when I talk about the energy matching funds, those of you that followed the legislature will know it's not a controversial topic at all. It's always steady. There's never amendments to get rid of it or change it. I'm being sarcastic. But what I think policymakers need to understand in that, which it's a fair debate, right? Should government be involved in that? Should it not? How should the private sector be doing that? Great debate. But I do think it's important for folks to understand we are not the only state doing that, right? We stood this up back in 2022. And these are, other states that stood up are not necessarily states that aren't used to energy production. They're states like Texas. They're states like North Dakota, Oklahoma, folks that are very well acquainted with natural resources and wanting to, catch up to us in some areas. So to my question to you, we just met with a company that's looking at Gillette, and one of their first questions was about the energy matching funds and how that works and if they could access it. But I think if you could talk further about just the fact that folks are looking at Gillette from all corners of the globe, and really what your guys' selling piece to them is, if, to Josh's point, maybe if the matching funds aren't a fit, how Gillette can still attract them.
Yeah, so that's I'm going to try to unpack that the best I can. The first, to me, first and foremost would be why Gillette, and then why Wyoming. And here coming up in the next couple weeks, or maybe a month or so, I get the opportunity to sell those terms to some investors, because a company is short a few million, and they're wanting to know how they can tap into that. And so it's a great opportunity. It would be a travesty, in my opinion, if that would go away, because as competitors, nobody likes to lose if it's not fair. And so when you see states like Texas investing $4 billion, attracting companies to their state, we have to do what we can where we can. And I think this is an opportunity for us to leverage in those conversations when I'm talking with investors to say, hey, look, no, this is an option for you guys. It may not be always a fit for you, but at least it's an option. And you guys, as the company and the owners and the investors, get to decide whether or not that's a good fit. But it is my job to communicate that those are tools in the toolbox in for you to use. And so I think without those opportunities and those tools, how can you be successful in a way, right? Because we want that investment. We want to show that we do care. And I will say this, a lot of times when I'm visiting with these folks, and many of you in this room want to see a community investing in themselves. And I think Gillette has proven that to a certain extent over the years. But I'm not satisfied with that. I want it to be better. I want it to be 1% better in any way we can. And so I think if that's the message that I can continue to communicate to these folks, I think they will see that. And we're doing that with our comprehensive master plan. We're opening up those doors. Like, those are the things that local level we can do to help drive those conversations at the state level with our legislators. And more so than anything, real quick, Rob, if I can, is the education. Sometimes as legislators and as politicians, like, we just, some, but you gotta know everything. Well, the reality of it is you can't know everything. And so we want to, for me, in my opinion, is we want to lean on the experts to provide us that data, provide us that information to make a good, educated decision. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Rob, can I jump in on that a little bit? I think it's a really good question about the idea of incentives and the idea of money. And so as the entity that for a long, long time was and continues to go out and recruit companies, everybody thinks, oh, well, you got to have super low taxes and you got to have a big incentive for people to come in. And what I'll tell you is that sometimes the incentive might be like a little bit of the attractant, the thing that might bring them here. But what gets them to choose Wyoming is not just the incentive. These companies aren't out there just running and looking for money. That's not what actually is part of their decision calculus. It's no different than your own businesses. You're thinking about workforce. You're thinking about the community that you live in. You're thinking about the long-term support. And I don't mean monetary, but I just mean like infrastructure support that the state will provide. Those things end up being much more important in the decision calculus than that initial attraction. So while, yes, it is incredibly important to have that, because otherwise you don't even get to take the opportunity, I think it's important for everyone out here to understand that it's a much more holistic approach that companies are taking. They're not just out there grabbing money. They're real companies just like your own who think about more than just that investment. And I think that's an important piece of it, but it's not all of it. And I think that's an important part of that education that we need to make.
Yeah, and just real quick, Rob, if I can, is to piggyback off of that, the company that I'm visiting with right now from Switzerland, all of their investment is from Europe. And so they don't even have any ties to the state of Wyoming. But it's an opportunity to showcase our communities and the state of what we can do for you. This is our school system. What a fantastic, these are our local colleges. These are the things that we can showcase, and you're welcome here, right? Like, we want you to be a part of our community in Gillette, and I think that's the encouraging part that they want to hear, they want to see, because and I also say this to them. You have an obligation to invest time and energy back to educating the community too, because it's a two-way street in that sense. In Gillette especially, we've seen a lot of companies come in, make their money, and then bounce. Well, that doesn't always fare well either. So what we want to do is create an environment where we create these win-win scenarios so that the community is educated, and we can also get that buy-in from them, but also the companies feel welcomed, and they know that they can grow there, and they can see the advancements, and they can see the technologies, and their people thrive.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And since administering the energy matching funds, that's exactly right. That, we have the requirement of a 50-50 match at a minimum. But lots of times companies come in and they don't need the one-to-one, right? They just need a little bit to get them over that finish line. And as we talked about earlier, and I know was discussed yesterday, I also look at it through the lens of, again, who is paying the bulk of our taxes in the state? It is this industry. So for us to just help and give back a little bit to help them develop new technologies and make sure those projects are here in the state seems like a no-brainer to me. But Josh, you touched on workforce. So one of the things we have with the energy matching funds is a review committee, and that review committee consists of myself, but Josh is on there for his perspective from the community and the kind of workforce perspective. We have Liz Gagan, our Director of Workforce Services, Erin Campbell, I know she's here, our state geologist, and Randall from the Governor's Office to really get that holistic view, because to your point earlier, if we have a project that we see, you know, hey, this is hundreds, maybe even thousands of jobs, that's so great, let's go, go, go. Do we have the workforce ready? So could you talk a little bit about workforce and how you guys look at that?
Yeah, so if you ask, just pretend like this conference was in any other state in the union, workforce is a challenge. Like this is not a uniquely Wyoming problem. And in fact, I think it's actually where Wyoming is situated in a better position than most of the country. And so follow along for a second here. So if you've ever heard me talk about the outmigration of Wyoming's youth or our working age people, you'll realize that we outmigrate more Wyoming native or more natives than any other state in the union. So by the time you're in your 30s, 65 to 70% of Wyomingites, people born here, move away. So our outmigration is higher than any other state in the nation. And you're like, Josh, wait a second. You're not really selling the idea that we have a lot of workforce. So follow me for a second. So we lose 65% of our people by the time they're in their 30s. The national average is somewhere in the 30s. That's what we call wanderlust. Those are kids who want to leave, people in their mid-career want to leave and try something else out. That's the national average is around 30%. So if we lose 65%, we have the gap between natural wanderlust and what we do today as a potential and untapped workforce. Because those folks likely want to stay in Wyoming. Heck, if you ask me, everybody wants to stay in Wyoming. Everybody wants to come to Wyoming. But reality says we have an opportunity to get a workforce that other states actually don't have. So the idea that we have a workforce challenge, absolutely true. But we have an untapped workforce of people who don't want to have to leave Wyoming. They want to stay in Wyoming, and they're looking for the opportunities. And so when I hear about companies that are expanding here in Wyoming, when I hear about companies who are considering moving to Wyoming or doing construction in Wyoming, my eyes light up because I actually think there's a lot more hope than any other state. In fact, no other state can tell that story like we can. We are set apart, and there is a huge opportunity there. So yes, workforce is a challenge. I think everybody is working to address that. There are a lot of programs from DWS. We're looking at the data really hard, but the bottom line is nobody has what we have, which is a difference between that national average and who actually leaves. They don't want to.
And that's a great point. One thing I would caveat is we're getting closer to time. Since I'm up here, feel free to hand questions to Emily. She'll run around and grab them. She'll hand them up to me up here. Dan, the next one's to you, and I sort of touched on the fact that we are not alone. I talked to you earlier about the federal perspective, but kind of what are you seeing as other states looking towards energy development and sort of that marketplace taking shape now that, again, I know Cindy Crane was up yesterday. She's got to balance states that have very firm views on one side of the aisle on energy, as well as states on the other side. So what are you kind of seeing as again, administrations change, what different states are doing to try to, promote their energy or try to bring that into their state?
Yeah. I differentiate between the energy supply states and the energy demand states. And then there's a set of states that are neither thing, right? Wyoming's an energy supply state, North Dakota, Texas, right? Virginia is a good energy demand state, so is California. I think for the most part, fossil fuel supply is chugging along, and the states that do business in that space are largely doing a pretty good job managing growth of those sectors. I think supply of alternative energy sources, nuclear, renewables, most states could do a lot to accelerate. And I would put the Wyomings and Texases and Oklahoma in that bucket too. I think they could do a lot to accelerate. Workforce is one way. The other is permitting and interconnection, the two cousins of permitting and interconnection. And, some of that is at a federal level, some is at a state level. But what I tell my state and local clients is you got to think about, there's a set of policy decisions which are hard to change because you got to go through the legislature and that stuff. But there's also a set of operational issues that no matter what your permitting process is, you can run it faster and you can run it with smaller error bands on it. And we've done a lot of that work in Texas about how do I take the existing process without a legislative fight about changing it, how do I just make it go faster? How do I just push the paperwork faster? And you know, anybody who's worked in operations knows if you go into an operational process that hasn't ever really been optimized and you go in there and try to make it run faster, you can find 20, 30, 40% speed just by running it better. I think almost all states have an opportunity to do that. Then you get the energy demand states like a Virginia or California or New York. All three of them have some level of clean energy goal also. It boggles the mind a little bit that they haven't, the things you would want to do to unlock that development, like making, like putting new nuclear reactors on site where existing reactors are and you're licensed for a second reactor, like accelerating transmission and distribution, like accelerating storage and the ability of the utilities to get paid for storage. They essentially haven't pulled those levers. And it's, you know, I think it's now, I think the good news is there's now I think an increasingly shared bipartisan critique, which is we've made it hard to build stuff. And I think, you know, if you go back 5 years ago, that wasn't a shared view. I think that view is becoming more of a consensus view. We've made it hard to build things. We made it easy to build software and hard to build stuff. And to me, at the state level, the race to the top is to make it easy to build stuff. And that is also the race. The federal government's gonna have to do the same thing. That's the unlock. I think if you're an energy investor looking at this space, the single biggest thing that unlocks more investment opportunity is cheaper and faster to build stuff.
Yeah, I could not agree more. You know, I won't name the project, but we were working on one that it really just blew my mind because it was a federal incentive from a certain agency in the federal government, and their timeline was, say, 5 years. But the permitting from a different agency to build that was 10 years. So we're like, hold up here. How's that going to work, right? The money's going to be gone and you're not going to be able to build this. So I agree that permitting is absolutely crucial. Sort of following that back to you, how robust or resilient would you say the capital markets are for coal projects? You know, we've heard a lot yesterday. The governor talked about the president's executive orders and sort of the different take he's having on coal. I will say when that happened, and I know my friend Travis Deti is here, our phones were blown up, right? As how can we do that in Wyoming and what makes sense? So sort of what are you seeing in the
Yeah, it's a very interesting space. So if you think about coal, the investment, you know, if you sit inside of a big asset allocator, big pension fund or somebody like that, you know, they're turning dials basically saying how much, you know, what percentage do I want in each sector and in each subsector? And many of the big institutional players have dialed down their desire to be invested in coal. For some of that's because they made some sort of climate pledge. I think for more of them, it's actually because they have an underlying concern about the growth opportunity, particularly in credit, that they worry about the credit risk in coal. So you've seen a lot of those big institutional players dial down exposure. That has created an opportunity for more niche players actually to swarm in because when there's less capital available, the returns go up. And so you've seen many more boutique or mid-sized investors say, well, actually, in equity and in debt investment in coal, this is a good time to get in because as the big players dial back their exposure, I now can demand a higher return. Your question about the capital markets, I think, is particularly interesting because that's really is the bond market is the question. For the most part, the way you get to the bond market is through the big banks. And they have been hesitant to grow issuance in the coal space into the bond market. That's created a demand for debt from these sort of mid-market debt investors who've made a lot of money because of that. Will the banks reopen the spigot to the bond market, and will the bond market have interest in the space? I think is an untested proposition. And the bond market is, you have to think about global players. Will the Japanese and the Europeans get into coal? Probably not. Will Middle Eastern money or US money be interested in coal? I think it's a question, and I don't think it's a like climate or carbon question. I think it's a credit risk question. Is their issue will be, are we confident in the credit risk?
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I know Dr. Krutka and I see Fred and Scott from her team have done a lot of work on carbon capture and great work on it. And we continue to work on new technologies around that. But one thing that really was interesting to me since those executive orders is there was a company that called about, hey, we might want to look at just building a new coal unit without retrofitting, without any sort of carbon capture technology on it, which, I had not heard in this role and for years, right?
Not in the US, but in Asia, a ton, right? Exactly. I mean, China and India, a ton, but in the US, yeah, very unusual.
Yeah, and that energy pinch we're talking about, right? I think folks are recognizing we have to have all of it if we're going to meet these demands. So next question, Josh, I'm going to kick to you. It talks about, how the funds from both the Business Council and the WEA are good and can work as incentives. What are your thoughts on reinventing how public-private partnerships are done?
Well, I think we want to make sure there's skin in the game. And I think that the Energy Matching Fund actually does a really good job of that because it's that one-to-one match. I think there's an opportunity to do that on bigger projects, though. I think we've got to look bigger. So the public-private partnerships that are going to make the most sense aren't the ones that are maybe smaller projects in a local community. Those are still going to happen. We still want to encourage those. I think we need to start looking at bigger projects, though. I mean, not talking about millions, but maybe talking about billions. I think we're in a spot in our state, and I think in the country where we've got to start thinking a little bit bigger. And so I think we should open our eyes a little bit and maybe add 3 zeros to the things that we're thinking about and think about what does Wyoming look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and how do we instigate that now? Because I do think that if you're not encouraged by all the speakers that have been at this conference or the conversations that you've had in the hallway, I think that you probably haven't been here, because it's pretty exciting. And so the way I look at it is, how do we encourage that continued use of what is government's role and make it as small as possible, but make it so that these public-private partnerships can happen. And I think it's large infrastructure projects, frankly. I think it's the bigger things that maybe people aren't thinking about, like transportation infrastructure. I think it is big infrastructure projects that are going to change things, maybe even in terms of entities that could be around for 50 years, large university type things or big lab type things. I think we got to think bigger, really, more than anything. And I think if we have that big vision and we put government in the right role, I think that's going to attract those private partnerships.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Mayor, to you, this question is saying, what excites you about the, quote, art of the possible with key industries and growth for your region in particular?
That's a really good question. I think the possibility for me is, I guess more so than anything, being on the front end of an industry that, and a lot of entrepreneurs can appreciate this, and everybody's kind of in a race to the market with these things. And so the sooner you get to the market, the better, right? And so the ROI is what people are after. So for me, and it kind of dovetails to all of this, so I'm going to try to bridge the gap here in this answer. But in my opinion, when we look at how these markets, I guess these companies are wanting to invest here, like they're wanting to see, does these folks really see what we see? Okay, because I can get excited, but are we really excited? And sometimes on the government side, there's a lot of talk, but sometimes you just have to execute. So less talk and more action. And so that's in part of my time, and that's what excites me, is because we've been able to do less talking, and we've been able to just demonstrate and just put our heads down and just go to work and come alongside these folks and help where we can. And really, like you guys mentioned, we're a conduit at the local level, and that's what I want to be, and that's what excites me, is that these companies and locals too, like we have so many, like in Gillette, we have so many companies that were raised there, and they're expanding, they're globally. And yet they're still wanting to stay in Gillette. And so I think those are the things that we want to cultivate and continue to create that environment where they all feel heard in a sense, but that they can see the growth, that they have a local official that's hungry and wants to be a part of the solutions, not just cause problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and really telling our story. I see Mike Wandler here with LNH. I remember I was coming back from when in my old job, a political conference in Florida, and I get on the plane and I'm like, I see Mike. I was like, I didn't see you at the conference, and he's like, no, I'm doing something with NASA, right? A company out of Gillette doing things with NASA, right? Telling that story is really remarkable. So I think that's great. Josh, I think this might be the easiest question of the entire conference. How should we change Wyoming's tax structure? We talked about that a little earlier. I have to say, in my old job, part of my portfolio was to do our revenue side of things, and frankly, dusted off the Tax Reform 2000, and most of those things were still sitting there. They're still true today. So what, if you could do that, what would you do?
It's actually the easiest because a lot of people, I think, have been thinking about this a lot. Well, one, I will say, remember, we're the and agency. I don't think it's necessarily scrapping everything that we have today. I think it is about and. Are we like the 47th, ranked 47th in lowest taxes or something, which I think means we're like 3 or 4 in terms of the best tax environment? And what I would say is that we need to align our tax structure to better align with the future of our economy. That is not to throw everything out, but it is to remind everyone that things like the manufacturing that is going on, the software development that is going on, the growth in terms of what I'll call human potential in the state has to be an element of our tax structure. Communities, local communities, need to benefit when their population grows. That's like a key tenet that has to happen, because if those incentives aren't aligned, you're asking a mayor to spread it thinner. Well, guess what? He can't. He can't keep spreading it thinner. So I think that at a local level, the local tax structure needs to be such that as their population grows, they can not only afford that growth, but they could even benefit from that growth to create amenities. And so I think that there should be work on this. I think tax shouldn't be a verboten subject. I think it should be something we get comfortable talking about, and we understand that businesses that are in the state that are currently not being taxed very much, and businesses that come to the state don't actually care that much. I know that's going to sound super controversial. Tons of people are going to help me understand why that's wrong. I'm happy to talk with you. But I can tell you that I've had companies that have come to Wyoming and said, we don't like your tax structure because it actually doesn't create the community amenities that our employees need. We want to attract workforce, and they don't see that the community is going to be able to take care of them. And I know it sounds a little mind-boggling, but they want to be partners. They want to be part of the solution. They don't mind paying for that, and their people don't either. We don't have to be 3rd or 4th. We could be 9th, and we're still only a single digit in the whole tax wars with the rest of the nation. We could be in a better spot in our communities. We could not make it so hard for Shea to fill potholes and do those things that matter. And so I think that the answer is we need to look at aligning the incentives for growth, not having the incentive be for stagnation or shrinkage, which is what our current structure does.
That's a great point. I think, when we were doing some analysis at one point, obviously you all know Wyoming has no income tax or corporate income tax. We looked at, okay, just hypothetically, if we did that, what would it have to be? And there's a caveat in our Constitution that if we were to ever do that, you could deduct that against all other taxes paid to the state. So we started running numbers, and you're looking at 20+%. So that's out the window. But I do think it's worth more discussion amongst our policymakers just to explain, and in my experience, in particular with companies that are wanting to come here, those that lead with the tax question never stay. They never stay. They don't come back. They don't look to do their project here. That rarely happens. So I think this is 45V. So Dan, I'm going to kick this to you. What is the status? Do you know the status is of 45V right now, the tax credit?
Oh man, I don't know that anything's changed.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I don't think anything's changed since January. Maybe I'm forgetting.
Yeah.
But
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, those tax credit discussions are going to be vital to some of these things going forward. And I know Congress is taking up a lot of that. But with that, we'll wrap up this panel. I appreciate your guys' time. I think this was a really thought-provoking panel. And again, when we talk about future investment and how we need to invest in our state, I think we got the best folks up here to do it. So thank you all. We'll take a 30-minute break now. So we'll see you all back in 30 minutes. Thank you.
Then rode off and left him there.
If I may have your attention, it is time to return to the ballroom, please. Our next session is about to start. Again, please return to the ballroom and take your seats for our next session. Thank you.
All righty. If everyone could find their seats, we're going to get going again. Our next speaker is Doug Bernauer. He's the CEO and co-founder of Radiant. I know you guys have heard a lot about nuclear over the last couple half days, but this is another reactor company that's looking at doing business in Wyoming, and Doug and I share the vision of trying to really do a cradle-to-grave scenario for nuclear in Wyoming. And the cool thing about Radiant, which he'll touch on, is sort of the niche market that these guys can fit with the lower megawatt reactor and some of the portable pieces. So with that, please help me in welcoming Doug Bernauer.
Thanks so much, Rob. All right. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks to Wyoming Energy Authority, and thanks to everyone from Wyoming and wherever else you might be from for coming. Really excited to talk to you today about what I'm doing, what Radiant's doing, which is building Earth's first mass-produced nuclear reactor. It's a really different idea. Trying to click to advance here. Okay, so I want to start with this. Right, this is a map of the country, continental United States, and what it's showing is where power is made and the scale of those power plants. All the purple dots there are nuclear, and you can see, a whole lot of nuclear out on the fringes, and that's all located near water, because that's where you could build those things. And those are gigawatt scale powering 1 million homes, in a dense urban area. And it's really, nuclear's relegated to sort of that use case today. And a lot of people don't know this. Some do, but nuclear is almost 20% of all U.S. electricity on the grid. So if you go and you charge your phone, and every fifth time you charge it, you're getting a nuclear charge. Somebody's splitting atoms somewhere for you, making clean energy. So it's a really important power source at grid scale. But I'm an electrical engineer. I grew up in Ohio. I joined SpaceX back in 2007. And back then they had no successful launches. So this was like my deep diving into Wikipedia and reading things late at night, finding that company. Joined them, worked on a bunch of very cool projects there. One of the notable ones is this Grasshopper rocket. This is actually the flight vehicle version of it that you see here. But we did that in a single year. Elon asked, I want a rocket with legs, and we designed a vehicle, got FAA experimental rocket permit approved, and put that vehicle in Texas and flew it around. Figured out precision landing, and then years later, all these rockets are reusable. But we did that in a single year with a very small team. And we worked with regulators. So, worked with the FAA, with the FCC, with the EPA to do that. But there's a way to go really, really fast. A lot of folks at Radiant are from SpaceX. I worked there for 12 years. While building the first rocket with legs is notable, I also did Hyperloop, and I did Boring Company. And these are these things Elon got very excited about. And so I was always kind of on these cutting-edge special projects. I then worked for him on Mars. So the idea was try to design a mission to take Starship, which is this vehicle that can carry a 100-ton payload off the planet. That's the same as like a C-17, like the heaviest military air transport possible. He's planning to do that to another world. So we were looking at, well, what do you do when you get there? And the best thing to do when you get there is to take the resources that are on Mars, ice and CO2, and with enough power, you can turn those into fuel, put them back in a Starship, and then you can fly there and back again. And that fulfills SpaceX's mission statement, make life multiplanetary. And without it, you can't do that. So I showed Elon how to do this and put these slides together, and I showed him with solar panels how you could possibly do it. And it's 3.5 football fields of solar panels that have to be set up by robots, that have to be designed to be extremely low mass and handle this 200°C temperature swing every single day and be anchored into dust or rocks. And he looked at all these things and went, that's too many miracles, it'll never work. And I agreed. And he said, what about nuclear? And I went, I'm gonna go look at that. And then I did that, brought it back to him, and we both saw that that's the only way you'll ever colonize another planet, really. If you're gonna do fuel production, so you can have transport there and back again, you need megawatts of power. To put megawatts on another world, you need nuclear power, right? It has to be concentrated. So I started just reading about it, learning about it, getting excited about who can build this reactor so that NASA can buy a big SpaceX rocket and buy a reactor and we can do this mission. After a couple of years, I found that I wasn't very excited about any of the nuclear designs, and the history of nuclear in the US is one where Idaho National Laboratory actually, up until 1977, they built and fueled and tested 52 reactors. And then since then, no new ones. So not very exciting, not very innovative. And so eventually left SpaceX after 12 years in 2019 to found Radiant. When I did that, I learned how to do nuclear core design. And in doing that, I changed what I wanted to work on to not a space rocket or a space reactor immediately, but I actually want to work on reactors for Earth. Because to make a good reactor for space, you need a really reliable technology. To make a reliable reactor, you want to mass produce a reactor. And the market to do that is on Earth, actually. So it brings us to the idea here, which is to do mass-produced microreactors that can be trucked to any customer location. And so what we want to do is build about 50 1-megawatt scale reactors per year from a centralized factory, bring that to a customer location, and at that location, you see a fence line, that's the NRC public dose limit. Outside of that fence, you could have a sidewalk or a McDonald's or whatever you like. There's a concrete prefab structure that's all above grade that gets installed within a couple of weeks. And then reactors get inserted into those slots, and then they're turned on. You connect 3-phase 480-volt power back outside your fence line, and the operator, whatever facility this is at, let's say a military installation, they say, I want this power on, and that's it, and that's how you interact with it. The nuclear fuel source in the reactor lasts about 5 years at the customer site, And then after that time, they shut down the reactor, wait 30 days, and they can put it back on the road, and it goes back to the factory, and the radiant takes that core out, puts a new core in, sends it back out, and the reactor lasts 20 years. Sorry, I forgot to play the fun part while I'm talking. So the fuel goes back to a factory. So really, a factory has to be built that does this 50 reactors a year and builds new cores, puts them in those reactors, sends them out, and then the cores come back and go into a dry cask storage. So what's inside this box that makes this possible? Right, it's a nuclear genset in a box. You can really think about it as a replacement for a 1 megawatt diesel generator. And where diesel is expensive, you can put a reactor on the road and you can truck this system out there and replace expensive diesel, which the rates are pretty wild. Some places like North Slope, Alaska, you can see $8, $9, even $10 per gallon diesel. So it has a lot of economic value, in high-cost energy markets. So there's a nuclear and heat generation portion of the box. You see a reactor pressure vessel there, standing up and sort of surrounded with these oval layers. That's the transport shield. So without that transport shield included, we would not be able to do this trick where we shut off the reactor, wait long enough, and then that combination of waiting plus having that shielding allows you to put the reactor on a public highway and meet the regulatory requirements from Department of Transportation and the NRC. So nuclear reactor splits atoms here, makes heat. This gets up to about 700 Celsius output temperature. There's helium in a closed loop that's pumped in, and it's extracting heat and it's transferring it to the power generation system, which is a turbine alternator compressor unit with CO2 as a working fluid instead of water. And that's mainly because you can get 2 megawatts of shaft power with a turbine this size on a CO2 system, and a water system is a giant turbine for that small amount of power, and it's actually very inefficient at this 1 megawatt scale. And then there are a bunch of heat sinks. So you take the fluid, spin a shaft to make 2 megawatts of power, to extract 1.2 megawatt electric to power the machine, netting 1 megawatt to customer grid or microgrid. Okay, so it's definitely not a traditional nuclear power plant. Normally you have a 1,000 megawatt system. We're at 1 megawatt, right? There's a huge disparity between sizes here, so we use actually a really tiny amount of nuclear fuel. It's about 1/5 of one of the fuel elements that are used in the big reactors, and they use a huge number of those fuel elements. But the fuel form is totally different. So a normal reactor can melt down. This reactor is using what's called a TRISO particle fuel, and there are other developers planning to use this. It's a fuel form dreamed up in the 1960s. And what it is are these tiny poppy seed sized little particles that coat of the uranium, and you have a huge number of those. And they're ceramic layers. So the ceramic layers handle about 1,600 degrees Celsius. The reactor operates down at 700. And so you're so far away that you can't overheat it. You can't melt it. Ceramic's not easy to melt, right? So it makes the safest possible form of fuel that you could put really close to your infrastructure or to people. That's the point of using it. It also has a helium gas as a coolant. So people are probably familiar or have heard about radioactive water. In a water-based reactor, they're using water as a coolant. That water becomes radioactive, and that's because it absorbs neutrons. Helium gas will not absorb neutrons. And if it leaks, it's also a gas. So it just floats away. And now it's a bad day because your reactor's not running, and maybe you want it, you rely on it. But there's no risk to the environment and no risk to personnel. So it's really a great material. Of course, it adds cost to use both of those things. But this is the design we're focused on is this reactor you can have as close as possible, and you can feel totally comfortable and safe being right at that fence line, or even having radiation workers inside that fence line. And also, it's a really small system. So at a 1 megawatt system that's high temperature rated, you can lose your grid power and you don't need it to run backup cooling pumps, which is a thing that's typical for big reactors. Right? There's a power fail-safe. We just allow some air to flow up, and it flows in without pumping. It flows in just because the source, the reactor itself is hot, and that heat pulls cool air in and cools down the vessel safely. So what can you do with that? One of our first customer use cases we're most excited about is to do critical infrastructure support. So this is showing like a military base and a loss of power, and instead of losing power and then running on diesel generators, where you maybe have a couple of days of power at the best, you're really stressed and you're worried and you're trying to get about 5,000 gallons of fuel, a full fuel truck every day. And if that outage is in a bunch of states, you can't reasonably support that. So For military critical infrastructure, they are really interested in having a power source that lasts for thousands of days instead of a day or two before you need fuel. Okay, so I've already explained a little bit about what is different here, but there's actually there's a whole slew of different reactor sizes that you can think about that are reasonable. The traditional thing we have on the grid today, we have 92 operating grid scale reactors, right? You can build maybe tens of those, maybe up to that about 100, but it might take about a decade to build. There are a bunch of other companies, you might know some of the names, right, in nuclear. I won't try to name all of them, but a lot of people are working on small modular reactors. And what are those? The idea is that they're a little bit smaller reactor. So you can put those on a grid where maybe you have a smaller community, right? It's not as big of a population center. So that creates a larger market opportunity and should be buildable in just years, not a decade. And then you've got microreactors, which are months and hundreds of units. And then what we're working on is even smaller than a microreactor, right? A microreactor goes in the ground. The idea behind one of our reactors is it works anywhere and there's no strings attached. You're not keeping fuel on a location, customer location, and everything is above ground. You're not digging in the ground. You can actually put this in areas where you've got permafrost, and the market opportunity is thousands of units. So that brings us to what are the interesting use cases. So in the upper left, you see this is a data center customer with a few units. This is a remote mining location, and some of these customers, they want to expand the amount of power they're using to operate their business. They need megawatts. They go to the utility, and the utility might tell them, okay, you're in a 3-year line to get that upgrade. These companies are unwilling to do that. They want to compete, and they want to get into innovative things like AI, and so they need power, and they want it immediately. And if when we deploy to them, we can do, in a month, you have 5 years of power source that you can have in any sort of location, right next to your existing facility, using only about 1,000 square feet per megawatt. This is showing desalination, or showing a really remote Arctic location that would need power. And you avoid, if you replace a 1 megawatt diesel generator, you avoid using about 1,200 gallons of diesel per day. So we're pretty far along. We've done a passive cooling demonstration on a heated unit. So instead of nuclear fuel, we have a unit that was built with these graphite monoliths. There's 37 of those that go in the core, and you can see the team here in this time lapse installing all of those and wiring them up. But we ran this big assembly, weighed about 12 tons. We took it up to 425 degrees Celsius. We ran these heaters to get it up to that temperature range, and then we purposefully shut off the helium pump and showed that the system naturally, passively cooled itself off, which is proof of that final safety feature of passive safety. We did this at our facility. We're located in Los Angeles. We have 75 people full-time. We have raised about $230 million now in private capital, have about $10 million in government awards. We actually, just a month ago, it was announced that we got fuel from the Department of Energy for our tests that we want to do at Idaho National Laboratory. We are on track now because of that to do a test at Idaho National Lab in 2026. And that will be a reactor we load in that we go and we have to run a series of tests to characterize the system, and then we'll run 150 hours continuously. We'll have reactor operators the whole time, but the goal is to do a unattended 150-hour long duration run, showing that it is a reactor that is semi-autonomous, that can just operate safely and simply. And then we'll get out of the dome and then go and focus on commercialization, which we're already working on, because we'd like to deliver 1 unit to a customer in 2028. From there, we would scale to 3 the next year, 8 the next year, and on up to 50 units a year, but at a reasonable pace to scale. So the factory is really the big innovation here. Factory-constructed reactor hasn't been done before. There are rules already. The NRC are aware of this type of a system, and actually it was encoded a very long time ago. There's in 10 CFR 52, there's a manufacturing license for factories. So I believe in all the above energy. I like every form of energy. Nuclear has its particular use cases, but this is actually a fun image showing on the left here. This is an energy rock in Wyoming. This is subbituminous coal, really important for the economy of the state. Really valuable. We need to keep digging it up, keep making that profitable. It powers other states nearby, and it powers the economy of Wyoming. But you have another rock, and a whole lot of it, I think there's about 1 million pounds a year produced, and I think it used to be about 40 million pounds a year in the US. So it's a thing that can come back and can provide a lot of value to Wyoming in the future. Right, and this is uranium on the right. They're just black rocks. You get them out of the ground. They have a lot of value, and right, we should be getting and using all the forms of energy that are possible. So we can do that. We can mine and we can export and we can build the economy of the state. And if we do that, we're not getting all of the value out of that uranium. If we just take the rock and we move it away to somewhere else. So if you could keep that rock here, turn it into a gas, put it in a centrifuge, spin it, enrich it to the degree you need, have someone turn that into a nuclear fuel, then Radiant can put that into a reactor, and then you can export a reactor. And in that way, you create the most jobs possible in the state, engineering jobs and technician jobs, and a huge number of them. You also take all that material off a roadway if you can co-locate those things. So the way of the past is the Manhattan Project. It's the scattered assets that are doing each of these things super far apart from one another. So there's an opportunity way bigger than just what I'm doing here. And Rob Krieger and I have been talking about this, and with others in Wyoming, we're circulating this idea. There's a huge opportunity for the state to be able to do this. And we've taken some steps toward this already. Actually, just this morning, we announced a deal with UEC, Uranium Energy Corporation, a memorandum of understanding to source Wyoming material. That was just announced. And Radiant are investing over $200 million to make this factory. We can put that in Wyoming. And our teams have been traveling around for about a year looking at different sites. We did a community engagement in Bar None about a month ago. So we're making good progress. This facility will be hiring about 75 jobs on day one. We'll scale to at least 250 good-paying, long-term jobs, right? And it can be that this is not the only investment that happens from outside this money coming into Wyoming, right? If we do what I just talked about and make it possible to do other things here that are part of that nuclear supply chain domestically. So that's my company, what we're doing, and the interest we have in Wyoming, and happy to take questions now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Doug. And folks, please do send forward some questions. One that I have, and something I thought you guys have done really well as a company is nuclear, again, is still somewhat new to policymakers here in the state. And there was some discussion this last session around, different bills and regulations we might need to add or change to allow storage of spent fuel or of used nuclear fuel. Can you explain to us a little bit about how you guys are looking at addressing that issue? I know your project